Tomb Raider. The myth, the legend, the controversial, the occasionally broken. But while most people talk about the gameplay or the turbulent development histories, I want to talk about something else, the protagonist of the series, Lara Croft. I became a writer principally because of Lara. She continues to hold a special place in my heart as an empowered and confident woman. In the version I first encountered, at least. And that's the thing. While she has some consistency through her various incarnations, there are variations depending on the creative minds behind her. Wimpy, stubborn, blasé, snarky, or downright psychopathic. Lara's different incarnations are distinct enough from each other that it's not possible to like them all equally. Everyone will have a favourite of some kind. So, I'm going through the incarnations of Lara, touching a little on some development and staff points, and a little on the game's stories. From the OG Lara in the first game, to the incarnation of the Survivor Trilogy's media, to some other media featuring her that I can access, I'll do my best to keep my own preferences in check, and introduce you to Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. Okay, filming this now, so there is absolutely no confusion that I am a Tomb Raider fan. This isn't me just entirely using recorded media to do this. I own and have played through the Lara trilogy. This one I've completed 100% at least 3 times. This one, it's so buggy. But this one, I admit I've never completed it, but I have played it. I played up to the end of the opening section of the Mexico area, and then I sort of burnt out on it. I also have the guides, or versions of the guides, for each of them, which in some cases was absolutely necessary. I actually quite like this one, and the Legend one. Also, I did once own Tomb Raiders 3 and Last Revelation, and got these guys to try and help me get through, but the controls just killed me. I absolutely did not get on with the controls of that era. Also, this thing. I owned this one on VHS, this one on DVD early on. I saw this one live, and now I've got both of them on DVD. I've never watched them in this form since then. But yeah, I think I'm a Tomb Raider fan. Also adding that I have played the 2 main Lara Croft spin-off titles, Guardian of Light and Temple of Osiris, Lara Croft Go, tried desperately to play Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and watched the 2007 animated series. More on that in the video. 2 more things. First, due to hardware age and time limitations, plus my not getting along with the controls of Core and Survivor era Tomb Raider at all, most of the game footage is not mine. I wish it was, but I couldn't manage it. I'll be crediting the channels they're from in this video. And secondly, given what I'm doing, visual or story spoilers will be present. Viewer discretion advised. Let's go! The original Tomb Raider was intended by her main creator Toby Gard to be a kind of gaming role model for young women, who at the time had a very narrow choice for female leads in the medium. Drawing from inspirations including Indiana Jones and Tank Girl, Lara Croft certainly has a suitable badass characterization, an archaeologist adventurer who doesn't take interference lightly, either from rivals or her employers. This version of the character has quite a different backstory to later incarnations, deliberately abandoning her aristocratic roots for a life of adventure after surviving a plane crash in the Himalayas. Her voice actress, Shelley Blond, creates a definite impression of Lara as someone who has that aristocratic edge and some real punch behind her, but a softness that shows something beyond a woman who jumps across pillars and shoots endangered animals.
What's a man gotta do to get that kind of attention from you?
It's hard to say exactly, but you seem to be doing fine.
It shouldn't happen like that.
Or like this.
Look over us kindly to Hoken.
So you think all this talking is just holding me up?
There isn't a huge amount to be said for this character, as there isn't a huge amount of story. It's mostly environmental, but you do get a sense of who Lara is.
After Guard left developer core design due to a lack of creative control, Lara shifts noticeably. It wasn't entirely devoid of original influence early on, as writer Vicky Arnold handled the scripts for the first 3 Tomb Raiders, creating a consistent tone, but that tone becomes increasingly violent and cold-blooded across Tomb Raider 2 and 3. In Tomb Raider 2, her moral code, while not evolving much beyond "this is dangerous, I want that," also has a clearer coldness towards humans. Guard didn't want her killing humans that much, so her killings in the original were limited. In Tomb Raider 2, she has a much more detached approach, even if it's justified by her antagonist being a mafia-styled cult. Separate from the games, we also see more suggestive elements in her promotional art starting around this time, which Guard, frankly few others at core design, probably approved of. With Tomb Raider 2, her voice actress changed to Judith Gibbons, who creates a far more sultry and harsher tone for her character. This is a Lara I can best describe as smooth and sarcastic.
Pardon me, if that was just your way of trying the doors for me. The true detox of evil. Aha, Gianni Bartelli, Via Caravelli, Venice.
Due to a number of factors, there isn't a huge amount to be said for her Tomb Raider 3 incarnation, although her interactions with other characters are at least doubled. We see some level of concern for others, a level of restraint that seemed absent from the previous game, but also no hesitation about killing when someone provokes her. She's not completely heartless, evidenced by her concern for a wounded soldier and disgust at the antagonist's goals for the artifacts she collects. It's just most of the people she interacts with end up dead for one reason or another.
Happy retirement.
I'd rather be the main course of the real feast.
Overall, this version of Lara Croft is a badass, but increasingly violent and prone towards a kind of dark sarcasm that alienated me initially. The stories suit her to a T, pitting her against insane opponents whose goals for pinching the artifacts in question are more about world domination than, I don't know, decorating the bathroom. There is a high degree of environmental storytelling at play, especially in the 3 expansions that released after each of the original trilogy, which otherwise had barely any story, so not much to say. This is a classic Lara to be sure, just not a Lara I default to unless thinking about this era specifically.
Well, I'm not quite sure where you're coming from, but I just want to know about the Infada artifact. In the temple up there.
Beginning with The Last Revelation, intended as the final Tomb Raider due to developer burnout from 5 to 6 straight years of developing nothing but Tomb Raider for publisher Eidos, we see a Lara with a good deal more attitude, even if that attitude tends towards put-downs and self-aware comments outside her genuinely friendly interactions with the side characters Jean-Yves and Azizus. There is greater emotional depth and an exploration of the dark side of her tomb raiding activities as she unwittingly releases Set, the Egyptian god of chaos, onto the world. On that front, with the rivalry with old mentor Von Croy and the increased stakes, I think The Last Revelation has the strongest narrative out of the core design era games, and consequently the most character Lara has shown until now. With this game, the main writer changed from Arnold to designer Andrew Sandham, who co-created the story with a large team and co-wrote the script with Hope Caton. You can see the impact of his writing as well as the influence of core design's fatigue with Lara as a character. There's no concrete interview stating this, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the negative traits increasingly shown by Lara in The Last Revelation and in Chronicles was a result of character fatigue. And speaking of Chronicles, we get even more character interactions, showing Lara in actually a better light than in The Last Revelation. She shows active care towards others, a want to protect people from foolish choices, and despite some racial stereotypes at play, her interactions with Zip during the VCI levels are genuinely entertaining.
You broke? You ain't dead, is you? Come on, girl, answer me.
Gonna be sore in the morning.
I knew you was too tough for a little fall like that.
I'm on the ground floor, aren't I?
Sandham wrote the entire story and script himself here because no one else wanted to touch it with a barge pole, and you can see a consistency here, barring continuity clangers. The story is pretty fragmented due to it being a series of flashbacks, and due to legal issues there's no sign of Jean-Yves, so there isn't much connection with The Last Revelation as there might have been. but thanks to the broader range in Lara's interactions, the story continues trending strong, and Lara in these two games hooked me in better than the original trilogy. This is helped a lot by the performance of her voice actress for the time, Jonelle Elliott, who puts in some great line deliveries.
There is more at stake here than the sum of the pieces, Von Croy. Ever heard of Armageddon? Unpleasant, even by your standards. Economy class. You back, Werner? No more set?
The Angel of Darkness was the gaming straw that broke Core Design's back, due to a number of production issues and pressure from Eidos to get the game out ASAP. It also saw a new story direction led by Murty Schofield, who also created a new character in the form of Curtis Trent, described in a recent interview as an equal to Lara, possibly a love interest for her. I have some questions, but they can wait. Also, I will be touching on male foils and counterparts for Lara, as they do have an impact on what I think of her portrayal in each incarnation, and now moving on. This version of Lara has been through a lot, although due to story cuts we don't know exactly what. We do get some idea from the official novels which released around this time, but this may or may not represent the original intent. This Lara is colder, more violent, and prone to verbal outbursts. Not bad language, but a pretty bad attitude. It suits the tone, but it doesn't feel quite right. Maybe there was more depth that got cut? Feels like that's a mantra for the game at this point.
If I had a coconut for every time some lunatic said something like that.
Your pathetic ignorance blinds you.
Now, tangent and full confession time. I don't like Curtis that much. He, and the overall tone of the game, is symptomatic of a trend in media around this time to go dark and grungy. He also has a pretty unpleasant and caustic attitude even when interacting with someone who is clearly in physical and mental anguish, and his initial interaction with Lara doesn't come across as romantic or flirtatious to me, it's just creepy. You could rationalise it through what he's been through in story, but Lara's been through worse, and even she isn't this edgy. It also feels alien to have a male character become playable in this female-led series. But what about the story? Well, in some aspects it's stronger than The Last Revelation, more cinematic and with a strong cast of villains even with the cuts. But those very cuts make enjoying this story difficult. It may even undermine what Curtis might have been, because there was a ton of stuff that was meant for him, including his own game, that never made it beyond the cutting room floor. I think it's mostly the strong vocal performance as a musical score which sustain the narrative, and it's not as if it ends on a true cliffhanger, it does wrap up through necessity. On the whole, I have mixed feelings about The Angel of Darkness. People seem to love this version of Lara, and there's an unofficial novelisation, link in description below, that softens out her razor edges. But for all the tonal changes across these three titles, Elliott puts in my second favourite performance of the character. She has some of her best moments within Angel of Darkness.
Egypt, Werner. You walked away and left me. No, Bouchard. She isn't. But your little friend is. I'll take care of you later.
Barbarian shard. You
Picked it up in the Louvre, yes. After you stole my painting. Do you know, it's going to be a real pleasure to shut you up.
This version of Lara persisted for 6 games, 9 if you include the Game Boy family spin-off titles, and on the whole has a wobbly portrayal. Not surprising, as the creative leads for her character changed so many times. She was hard, became harder, borderline unlikable at points, though there were continued moments of caring and softness. And a heap of sass. Okay, briefly on the first 2 movies. They have problems, no doubt, but they were my introduction to the character. This Lara, played by Angelina Jolie, is action woman galore and has some one-liners that live rent-free in my head.
Everything lost is meant to be found. Was it programmed to stop before it took my head off? T is for guests. The door is for intruders.
Right, so pretty much touch anything and you get your head chopped off.
She's so sassy and determined and still has a smile of genuine enjoyment. But This is also the media that introduced the tragic family backstory which plagues the franchise to this day, so I can't be sure whether I fully like this version, especially now, but I couldn't not mention it. And somehow, the worst second film does a male foil mostly right in the form of mercenary Terry Sheridan, and neatly continues a recurring theme in Tomb Raider since The Last Revelation. Should Lara even be doing this? Also briefly, I've already mentioned a set of novels that came out around the time of The Angel of Darkness. They generally filled in gaps in the narrative, such as how Lara survived the ending of The Last Revelation. The writing quality's okay, and it's definitely the Lara people have known up to this point. Sassy, hard, prone to violence at places, not completely without care or affection for those she actually cares about. They also serve up a set of genuinely compelling narratives. There was also a notable series of comics that came out, multiple in fact, some standalone, but the most prominent was the long-running series published by Top Cow, who even had Lara and their star character Witchblade form partnerships from time to time. This version isn't treated as canon, as while the stories there are sometimes adapted from the series, they feature multiple deviations from the established narrative. Fast forward one developer change to Crystal Dynamics and we hit 2006's Tomb Raider Legend, my true introduction to the series. This is the version of Lara that remains my favourite incarnation of the character. Guard was brought back to help with her redesign and writing, and would remain in a creative capacity until 2009. Through the entire Lao trilogy, Lao standing for Legend, Anniversary and Underworld, Lara is voiced by Keely Hawes, and honestly, I default to this version of the voice when I think of Lara.
I'm afraid you've been misled. I only play for sport.
It's a netherworld populated by snake people, although the enlightened one, Narada, spoke rather fondly of it.
Alistair, meet Tuanak. She's a lovely pre-Incan civilization, currently in ruins.
The Lao trilogy is technically a series reboot, although the developers later called the Lao era Lara a reimagining that didn't invalidate her earlier adventures. This Lara has a backup research team helping her, although she's still deeply knowledgeable about ancient civilizations and writing systems, so she isn't robbed of any actual, tomb raiding ability. They even do zip better in this version, side tangent. It just makes her more grounded, even if her knowledge of ancient writing systems continues to beggar belief.
Here sits the god King Qualipec,
Bogvati of the Seventh, the last queen of Tiwanaku.
In Legend, where Guard took on a lead story role alongside writers Eric Lindstrom and Aaron Vanian, she still has that slightly sarcastic or at least tongue-in-cheek streak to her character, but also a deep caring for those close to her. It doesn't rob her of badass elements, but instead feels like it reinforces them. This is someone with experience, but also someone who hasn't lost her humanity. One of the best moments in the game for me, despite slightly ropey writing, is when she confronts her nemesis Amanda Everett and seems to fully contemplate shooting her in cold blood.
From this moment, your every breath is a gift from me.
Also, it took Guard coming back for Lara to get a female main antagonist with more than 7 or 8 lines. In Anniversary, a remake of the original game set within the Lao continuity, Guard took on a direct writing role alongside Matt Ragianti. In this version we see an earlier and more aloof version of Lara. She has a real harshness to her, but also a greenness. It's in this version, and in some scenes in Legend, that we see that familial drama rear its head. But for all I dislike how much it impacts her adventures these days, I also like how well it's used in the Lao era overall, and Anniversary uses it sparingly enough that it doesn't pull the character out of shape. It's not the be-all end-all of her character, it's just a driving force for these adventures specifically. And there's some wonderful storytelling related to her rival Larson, showing just how far she pushes herself in pursuit of her goals.
This is the end of the line.
Just hand it over, Larson. This has nothing to do with you.
What's it got to do with you? The Scion belongs to Natla. Face it, you got no business here.
I don't have time for this. Get out of the way or you die.
What you gonna do, shoot me? Come on, Lara. I just work here. Now, I know how bad you want this, but I can't let you pass. And we both know you're not gonna kill me for it. That's just not who you are.
I'm not who you think I am.
Underworld, which was principally written by Lindstrom but has a story co-written by Lindstrom and Guard, is where her character feels both strong and weak. The familial element becomes a little overemphasized for my taste, but there is a delightful determination that feels all her own, and a unity to the narrative likely due to there being just one principal scriptwriter. She also has a bit more depth, even if the almost complete removal of Legend's banter with her colleagues makes the story and consequently her adventures feel very empty. I know a lot of people didn't like the chatter in Legend, but it wasn't as if she meekly kept quiet. The theme of the wisdom of raiding tombs comes up once more in full force, in a context that is far less on the nose than in Last Revelation, Cradle of Life, or the later Survivor trilogy. It only really comes into focus after the Croft Manor section, where her absolute drive to pursue her goal makes her come off as unusually cold, someone she isn't normally in this continuity. It's a nice spin on her character, and continues naturally from this point into the later, slightly more bonkers aspects of the narrative.
What are we going to do?
After I deal with the authorities, I'm going to southern Mexico to retrieve Thor's belt.
What? Alistair's dead, and it's just business as usual?
I need Thor's belt to get his hammer, and I need the hammer to kill a god.
Underworld brings the Lao trilogy's arc to a satisfying if melodramatic conclusion, and this also sees the end of this Lara. There is an argument to be made that the Lao era Lara is rather shallow, with a lot of the characterization on the surface, but I'd argue you could say that about every incarnation of Lara. And in a great twist, even though her support team is all male, they are all effectively subordinate to her. She's the one in charge, and all the people she comes up against in a big way are also women. It feels more balanced in a strange way. A woman tackling female power in opposition to her own female power, not in opposition to a male power. Now I'm getting far too analytical. For all the genuine faults and missteps that can be found, this remains my favourite incarnation of the character, warts and all.
Goodbye, Mother. Rest in peace.
There was also a 2007 animated series that didn't click with me initially. It's an anthology net animation which has thankfully been preserved, and has different animators and writers taking on Lara, here voiced by Minnie Driver. There is a general consistency, showing Lara as determined and free-spirited, while also being tongue-in-cheek with elements of her character from the Core and Lao eras.
Finding Atlantis was never this vexing. Why can't I find Thermopolis? You'll download the coordinates to me?
As soon as possible, Miss Croft.
Make it sooner than that, please. I'm about to go a little outside mobile phone coverage.
It's a high-stakes game, Lady Croft.
If it weren't Mr. Atchison, I wouldn't be interested. Thank you, gentlemen. I've long fancied the Scarlet Scarab. Cheers.
Can't see a bloody thing in these.
I have a soft spot for this series, and it has things to suit many moods. Adventurous, unsettling, funny, weird. It feels like a format which suits Lara. Self-contained adventures where the driving consistency is Lara as a character. In this instance, an archaeologist adventurer who is cool, snarky, but not heartless. An interesting balance of what by this point was 2 or 3 versions of the character. Between Lao and Survivor lies another entry that should be mentioned. The short-lived Lara Croft spin-off series, yes, it's really called that, is sometimes treated as part of the LoL continuity, but developer interviews have clarified that it was its own timeline intended for more experimental spin-off titles. There isn't much to say about this version of Lara. She's pretty bare bones, although Hawes continues to put in good performances for the two major releases, Guardian of Light and Temple of Osiris.
Step away from that door, or this bomb is going to hurt more than your pride.
But it was too late. The staff was a trap, and the temple a prison.
She's almost like a distillation of the basic Lara traits into a version that might reach a new audience. Yeah, sorry, this series really isn't much to talk about, and Lara doesn't have much to do in this series, especially since it's now been left on the scrap heap, so sorry, this bit's very short. Moving on. The Survivor trilogy is where things reach a sharp turning point, and where my love of the character was tested. When I first saw this Lara in early trailers, I was taken aback, mostly because I'd seen her early years already. Twice. Seeing it retrodden again felt redundant. But I'll admit, the 2013 reboot was actually good once I got what the story was doing with Lara and everything else. Also disclaimer, but I've never gotten on with the reboot gameplay. It just felt so tyrannically Uncharted style 2010s that it turned me off when I tried more than once. The reboot's story is strong, to be expected when helmed by writer Rhianna Pratchett. There's an interestingly grounded take on some of the same magical elements the series has had before, and Lara in this version may start out as rather wimpy and off-putting, but she becomes genuinely strong and dependable. She has a real draw that keeps my attention, and her genuine chemistry with Samantha Ishimura and Jonah Mayava don't feel like they undermine her. Rolf isn't the best character, and he feels too much like a foster father for comfort, but he isn't terrible. Even with these caveats, while initially seemingly under others' thumbs, Lara stands up for herself when it matters.
But this is real, Dr. Whitman. We're not standing on a myth.
Himiko's dangerous, Matthias! She's angry, she's vengeful, and she has real power!
The reboot does have an infamous, if overblown, scene that, for me, ranks alongside that Curtis sequence from Angel of Darkness in terms of cringe, but it could have been a lot worse. It's with Rise that I began to doubt what was happening with this version of Lara. Pratchett returned as lead writer, so there is a consistency to her, but this is where the family element and some pretty arbitrary character restrictions come into play. In interviews, Pratchett has stated that she wanted to give this new version of Lara more sass and one-liners, explore the trauma related to her opening adventure, and stop bringing her father into the equation. Something that, in her words, would have been better if focusing on her mother. You know, like they did in the Lao era. But there were higher dictates at work, forcing a male figure to be part of Lara's journey. Rise's story also suffers from an artificial drama born from the overt family focus and some poorly defined end goals, which to me smells of rushed writing and unfulfilled ideas. Combined with some odd character missteps, this feels like one step forward, two steps back for Lara, and almost turned me off this version.
You said another Croft doesn't have to die for this. What did you mean by that? You killed my father, didn't you?
Trinity ordered his execution. I couldn't do it.
You're lying!
I loved him.
No!
With Shadow, which was led by writers Jason Dozoy and Jill Murray, Lara seems to be slowly changing into a character I can better respect, even if the writing quality sadly dips a little. There are still points where, given all she's been through, she should be a tad less weak-willed and deflated, although her eagerness about tombs and temples is genuinely enthralling. She also moves and behaves like she's actually used to acrobatics and exploration now, which is great. Sadly, the Lara versus Trinity subplot that's been there to some degree in all the Survivor media up to this point wears very thin. It really hamstrings her character. The theme of the wisdom of Lara's tomb raiding is brought back in a new light. as it not only challenges the wisdom of meddling in higher powers, but the cultural ramifications of an outsider intruding on local culture, which none of the previous incarnations tackled. By the end, Lara seems to be fulfilling the developer's promise of becoming the Tomb Raider. Not the person she was before, but someone who could have gone on those adventures. Still severely lacking in pithy comebacks though. For me, three things always undermine this version of Lara. First, the focus on the familial element. You could have had the Trinity thread without tying it into her tragic family backstory all the time. It just feels like unnecessary cluttering of her past. Why does everything have to tie back to one entity? It's a style of storytelling popular during this period that I detest, partly due to overuse. It undermines Lara as her own person. She even meta-narratively points it out.
I'm sorry I lost the box.
It's not your fault. It's Dominguez. It's Trinity. All the way back, as far as I can remember, it's always been them.
The second point is that while her interactions with other characters tend to be entertaining, they detract from Lara as her own person. I understand there were good reasons for this, and having her interact with others isn't a bad thing. See Legend. But combined with the third factor, it feels like Lara isn't asserting herself that much, which feels all the more problematic when she's had a male trending set of antagonists for most of the series. The third and final thing /factor /point is unfortunately Camilla Luddington's performance. While it stands out in its own way, it doesn't sound like Lara. Okay, hear me out. Lara has generally had a voice that wasn't always deep, but was always rich. A strong voice, even in moments of weakness, a voice that stands up. With Luddington, she can often feel a little flat and thin. Her performance does improve across the trilogy, and I'll say that Luddington did the best with what she had and should be commended for that. And there were a number of times where she truly nailed it.
You're a low, selfish, murdering coward. All these queens, they're all you, Himiko. First and last. Oh God. And now you want Sam. Well, you're not getting her. When I was young, it was just my father and I. He was an archaeologist too. In his last years, he was obsessed with myths about immortality. Of course, no one believed him, including me.
This Lara is complicated, in good and bad ways. She's not my favourite, but I appreciate what was done, and I also understand that there were significant creative compromises that handicapped her as a person. But then I see some scenes and I can believe that this Lara will go on to find Atlantis, explore Antarctica, defeat a biblical elder species, and recover Mjolnir. If I can still believe that even with these problems, it did something right.
I'm not going home.
I must confess, I haven't explored much if any of the Survivor era related media, as I have a deep dislike of tertiary material that must be experienced to understand the main installments of a franchise. Halo, Dead Space and Final Fantasy XV were all guilty of this. I have heard good things, which I think I can attribute to the involvement of Pratchett and writer Gail Simone, who also worked on the 2007 series. Good writing does a lot to bolster up an unsound concept. I'm sorry to admit that the 2019 movie, written by Geneva Robertson Dworet and starring Alicia Vikander as Lara, didn't impress me from what I saw, mostly because it feels like a weaker retread of the reboot's narrative. Meanwhile, the 2024 animated series, again from what I've seen of it since I don't have a Netflix account, seems like a genuine effort by showrunner Tasha Huo to reconnect with a version of Lara many people love to this day, even though I've heard some mixed reactions. Lara's voice actress, Hayley Atwell, captures something about Lara that I have missed in this new incarnation up to now.
History doesn't always tell us the whole truth, because the real truth is too difficult for most to bear.
Pratchett also approved of the direction Hoare took with the tone, so that's probably a good thing. This new animated series is also helping to set the stage for perhaps the most unusual aspect of this era of Lara Croft. Crystal Dynamics announced in 2021 that they were intending to unify all the Tomb Raider timelines into a single canon. Yes, all of them. I've seen tons of speculation online on this subject, but here's my personal take. I think that unification will be of 3 parts. Part 1, make older entries available on current hardware, which they seem to be doing. Part 2, create a consistent and unified look for Lara going forward, incorporating elements from across her portrayals, which they seem to be doing. Part 3, include references to past adventures in the current continuity, that being the version of Lara that emerged following the Survivor trilogy and its opus of additional media. The incorporation of Zip in the animated series and references to earlier games within the Survivor trilogy seem to back this up. You can do the references easily enough. Text logs, artifacts in Croft Manor, throwaway lines. That means major continuity hitches like the completely different backstories for each of the timelines can be smoothed over. Heck, put in stuff from other media for good measure. Have throwaway lines about, that ugly business is Africa, I lost a friend to an artifact, or even, yes, that man did raise the Lusitania, long story. Lara Croft is a complex character because of how much she has changed over the years, and how much she's also stayed the same. While I may have sounded negative or pessimistic during some parts of this analysis, I truly love each of her versions for different reasons. The core era Lara is old-fashioned if hard-edged fun. The Lao era Lara has a strong character backed up with badass elements and a consistent narrative. The Survivor Lara is the most human she has ever been, and is slowly becoming a character I can truly respect. And most of the other portrayals in spin-offs and related media manage to capture a certain something, which means I don't actively dislike them. That speaks to the strength of Lara as a character and an icon of her medium. I don't know where the current franchise owners and developers will take Lara going forward, especially with their ambition to unify the timeline, but I don't think that will totally remove my enjoyment of a woman who has been an inspiration for my work as a writer. Because of her, I have a strong preference for female leads in my stories. Because of her, I notice all the more when female leads are undermined by dependence on a male counterpart or familial drama. Because of her, I am who I am as a creator. Happy birthday, Lara Croft. May we raid together again. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, you might like some recommendations for Tomb Raider content on this platform. First, I would recommend Steven3571 and Saki Croft, 2 channels mostly dedicated to playthroughs of fan levels created using the Tomb Raider level editor. Next, there is Jennifer Millward, who not only created the Angel of Darkness fan novelisation, but also provides the voice of Lara Croft in a number of fan projects, including the bonkers War of the Worlds level set. She captures a term that I can best describe as the ideal meeting point between Gibbons and Eliot. After that is Steve of War, who is creating an ongoing retrospective covering all the mainline Tomb Raider titles, alongside some coverage of fan creations and an active Twitch account if that interests you. He's a funny character, and his opinions are interesting even if I don't agree on all points. Zelfie, who also worked on the 1-3 remaster, created a parody series called Lara Croft, which is hit and miss, but there are some great in-jokes to be found. Then there is Bob the Pet Ferret, who is a self-confessed big fan and recently created a video on the core era expansions, but also does videos on things like Fatal Frame and Final Fantasy X-2. Axemania does fun videos, which include ranking videos and a journey through platinuming the recent remasters. Raidercast, along with his charming husband, does Tomb Raider related stuff including level playthroughs and ambient sound videos. And then there's Tartancroft, who was my playthrough introduction to the core era Tomb Raider titles. As for the series' music, which I think stands as some of the best in gaming, composers Nathan McCree, Peter Connolly and Martin Iveson have released their music for the games in the form of the Tomb Raider suite for the original trilogy, and official releases on streaming services for The Last Revelation, Chronicles and The Angel of Darkness. Official streaming releases also exist for the 2013 reboot by Jason Graves, Rise by Bobby Tahori, Wilbert Roger II's score for Temple of Osiris, and most of, Lara Croft go by the group Pixel Audio. You can even easily and legally find the scores for each movie by Graham Revell, Alan Silvestri and Tom Hulkenberg respectively, and the latest animated series by Pinar Toprak and Get It Wonder. Sadly, Legend, Anniversary, Underworld, worked on by Charles Brumfullman and Colin O'Malley, and Shadow by Brian D'Oliveira don't have official or easily accessible releases, and I'm not saying more about that. There are so many others you could find, both creators and original developers, to enjoy. But these are a few names to get started, and I hope this video encourages you to look at the whole series with a new eye. If you enjoyed, please check out my other videos, and if you want to support me, check out my most recent book, Lost Station Cersei. Link in the description, and one of the characters was kinda inspired by Lara Croft. I'll let you guess which one if you decide to try it out. Anyway, thank you for watching, and until next time, see ya!